BMW, the car company, you could say luxury car company, has recently been embroiled in a bit of a scandal after announcing that, yes, indeed, it will be packaging a sort of subscription model for heated seats. Yes, now at this point we are nickel and diming you even for your luxury car heated seats. This is obviously not a cheap vehicle, that's why I use the luxury term. And of course, a lot of people, I would say freedom-loving individuals, have come to the prevailing notion that we are paying more for features we used to get for free back in the good old days. And of course, there's not really a good reason for it. You know, at best, some corporate apologists might cite inflation or added costs or something to that effect. But I've seen all of these arguments before. As soon as this controversy sprang up, I realized, this is very similar to microtransactions and DLC arguments in video games. And that's the topic of this video. If you take nothing else from this video, just know that it's happening all over the place. It's not just in video games. So, what do these freedom-loving individuals who have railed against BMW and their practices of sort of paywalling heated seats behind some sort of subscription model in this particular case, what do they have in common with me and my railing against microtransactions in video games? Well, the reason why I think this is basically identical to gaming is because we used to get all of the stuff for free, or perhaps for merit, based on our competitive skill and how high we climbed on a ladder, if you want to talk about, mastery skins or something to that effect, which still are every now and then seen in games, but usually alongside actual microtransactions. So let's take a step back a little bit and talk about DLC first, because this is really where we started to see the rubber meet the road in terms of microtransactions and all of these sort of like pay more for a game after it's already come out type of deal. You also saw map packs that you would download. I'm thinking back to the console days of, I think it's the 6th generation, but whenever the Xbox 360 was in its heyday, you would see people using Gears of War or Halo 3, and they'd be like, oh yeah, let's get some map packs, dude. Let's pay $15, $20 for a few maps that, at that point comprise, I would say, a non-trivial quantity of the overall maps. It's not like these games had 20 maps by default. And so in order to get a reasonable plethora, a diaspora of maps that you could construe as interesting environments for competitive play, you actually had to pay way more than the asking price of the game. And this was a huge downgrade over even console shooters that came with map editors for you to customize the existing ones, albeit usually not from the ground up like you would see in PC titles. And at the same time, you just had less content overall. You saw bots start to get removed as well around this era of gaming, and you would just generally see less content, that content being stripped out to be repackaged and sold to you as DLC. This would also extend to single-player titles. Of course, everybody remembers Day 1 DLC and Day 1 patches. And, the patching thing, okay, whatever, that's based on physical distribution meeting digital distribution. But if you're going to cut content from the base game so that you can sell it to me immediately, then you're really showing your hand there. It's not that this was finished at a later date and then packaged to you as an additional download, which I would argue, probably shouldn't be charging the costs that they were charging for. However, if you are going to go down that road, and you just have it available at the first, day of launch, then you're really obviously showing your hand. You're obviously saying, hey, actually this content, was ready to be in the game. Maybe you even download it or install it or what have you. And all you're downloading with the DLC is just a kilobyte sized text file that unlocks the content for you. Stuff like this started to happen more and more as time went on, because the content was already on the disc itself back in these days. So this would be stuff like Mass Effect 2, Mass Effect 3, these games that had Day 1 DLC associated with them. So maybe you can't remember that far back. Maybe it's just something that you missed because you came up a little bit later on in the space. But we also had pay-to-win stuff take a pretty big raise up in that sense, because that was when microtransactions started to get big. And eventually enough people said, okay, well, we were trying to be competitive, then I don't want to have to compete with my wallet and bank account in addition to my skill. I just want it to be about my skill. At what point does it stop being reasonable? And so many games, although especially not the mobile market, strayed away from pay to win. Okay, that's a third rail. We won't touch it for PC games and console games. We'll just give you cosmetics instead. But this is still a regression in what we had before. I talked about the day one DLC. That's a regression in terms of the content that we had as soon as we bought something. The idea being that if the content's already on the disc that we bought physically, why don't we get access to it immediately? Why do I have to pay extra money and download a kilobyte text file to unlock it for me when, reasonably speaking, I already have the content, you know? If all it needs is a text file to unlock it, that's ridiculous. The same argument holds true for cosmetics, where we once had the ability to express ourselves through customization without needing to pull out the wallet. That has now been put behind a paywall. It's not like the same ratio or the same sort of amount of customization options remain free. And then there's this sort of premium setup somewhere else, although I would still argue against that from a more principled stance. You can't even make that more apologistic argument for the existence of paid cosmetics because it's still just a regression, and they've cut so deeply into the number of by default free cosmetic customization options in all of these games. Everybody remembers Halo Infinite with selling the color red until Microsoft had to pull back a little bit from that and realize, oh, this is going to look really bad, even though every other developer is already doing this. You know, we just happened to catch flack for it online, so all right, yeah, we'll deal with that backlash. And at the same time, at what point do you guys get tired of games themselves being these storefronts, advertising to you that you can break out your wallet and buy something else inside the game? Why would you want the game to be a storefront? Why would you want the game itself, where really you're just there to play a game? That's the main purpose. Actually, they need to advertise to you that there's more DLC, there's more, content, which we all know is a bit of a farce. There's more cosmetic customization options. You could get this cool new skin in League of Legends, or you can, pimp out your weapon with some charm. The one argument for cosmetic microtransactions seems to actually be that, if it's related to esports, then a proceed if it goes to the team that you're trying to support. That is a little bit easier to swallow, although I still have some reservations against that. But most of the time, it's just the company that made the game building in some extra sources of revenue and then advertising to you, and I would argue spoiling your experience. If you're just used to it by now, you don't know what it was like to boot up a game, a multiplayer game in fact, and just be greeted with the splash screen for the game, the menu, and the ability to just go into a ranked playlist or a matchmaking or whatever, what have you, load up a lobby, invite your friends, all that stuff. You didn't have to battle through poorly designed UI that is just there to annoy you into remembering that actually this game is more than a game, it's also a storefront. Okay, so you can buy a bunch of stuff. And so those advertisements have now despoiled even the hobby of gaming. Even after you've bought the game, you've given them money, the advertising and marketing worked insofar as they've got you on the hook and you're playing their game. It's everything they could want. They can sell the idea that there's a lot of people playing their game because you're contributing to the player numbers. You've obviously bought the game itself and contributed to their money. Like, it's all that they would need, but no, they need even more. And so they're going to advertise to you in the game as well. As if other people using these cosmetics weren't enough of an advertisement. Nope, not even close. I'll close by talking a little bit about NFTs. Obviously, anytime there's any sort of big crypto movement, it tends to be swarmed with bad actors looking to make one over on marks that just don't understand and don't know better. I won't say too much about whether or not NFTs can actually be used as a force for good someday, but their injection into gaming is just another extension of the fact that people like to be the first ones on the block so that they can use some new technology or new technology. Obviously, CSGO had basically the same thing for quite a while. And they use it to get one over and get some money over some gullible people who just get owned as a result. And NFTs really are no different in that respect, as you can just see by following all of the different headlines and stories about their value plummeting, not just related to this most recent crypto crash, of course. So why are there so many game developers who are hell-bent? I mean, Ubisoft has made headlines recently for this exact thing. Why are there so many game developers hell-bent on getting NFTs involved? Because at that point, it's like the users themselves. You'll have these power users that are more than just whales. Whales in a mobile sense, or even in PC games like Genshin Impact, which is basically a mobile game, have all of this sort of allure around them for developers because they know that they can just appeal to these guys and they'll spend thousands, hundreds of thousands in some very extreme but very prominent cases of their hard-earned money, or maybe not so hard-earned if they're willing to part ways with it so quickly and so easily, on a game that is they're just buying JPEGs or something, they're buying waifu JPEGs on their phone. This is a real phenomenon, even though we just term. We talk about it in silly terms, obviously, and it does seem very silly to anybody who doesn't do that behavior, but it's a real thing, and a lot of developers are very keen on expanding their nets to catch as many of these whales as possible. And if they can get some people who aren't just whales in the sense of money, but whales in the sense of word of mouth, where they will evangelize and spread the idea that yes, you can actually make money. That's literally what a pyramid scheme is based off of, and I'm sure that the pillars of the community globally that gaming developers and publishers would never use such such a force for anything other than good. So that's a brief little touch on NFTs, but you can see as time goes on, it's just reducing the amount of content, the amount of features, just the elements of the games that you're supposedly owning. Although, of course, everybody reads the EULA, right? Wink, wink. The whole idea is that you're losing out on more features, on more things about your favorite pastime, your favorite hobby. And you're not getting anything in return. You're being charged more, or you're being advertised to, and your experience is being despoiled by NFT evangelists and all this other shit. And in a way that you can't toggle off. You can't turn off the cosmetics that are really visually noisy and repulsive. You can't turn off something that makes it confusing and hard to read in a competitive environment, because of course the whole point is that the other players themselves are advertising the fact that this microtransaction exists so that you might get it too, especially if you think it confers a very subtle competitive advantage, which is another third rail nobody wants to touch on, is in Counter-Strike, for example, which skins make you harder to see. How about any of them, because we're so used to the way that the game looks for so long. Yeah, so the long and short of it is, just like with BMW, just like with cars, just like with a point where you could have owned everything when you bought the product, that's gone for gaming, and it's going to be gone for quite a while, unless you guys just stop buying them, really. So that's my message. Stop buying them. Stop allowing them to get away with this behavior. And I don't know, just make them swallow the Crowpill as the developer. Maybe we'll get a little bit less experiences like that.